In today's episode, we're honored to have with us a dual military couple, Carol and Ken, who managed to reach financial independence just 4 years after commissioning. Their story is going to be packed with practical insights, hard-earned wisdom, and a very candid look at what it really takes to build wealth while serving in the military. By the end of this episode, I think you'll learn three main things. One, how Carol and Ken used a savings rate of over 60% at times of their career, as well as a mindset of intentional simplicity to reach lean FI while on military pay. Number two, how dual service life presents both financial challenges and superpowers, including how to stay united as a couple when the Navy throws everything at you. And third, tactical tips on TSP contributions, living intentionally, and achieving autonomy without sacrificing your lifestyle or your sanity. So whether you're active duty, a military spouse, dual military or not, or maybe you're just curious about how real service members are actually building wealth, I think this episode will inspire you to take charge of your financial future with purpose.
Welcome to the Military Money Manual Podcast, where every episode is all about achieving financial independence in the military faster than before. We believe personal finance shouldn't be boring or intimidating. Building wealth can be simple, and financial freedom is the ultimate financial goal. Now, here's your hosts, Spencer and Jamie.
Yeah, when we first met, it was fresh out of college, fresh out of the academy.
Well, let's specify for the military audience. By the academy, he means the Naval Academy. I realize that there's a lot of...
The best one.
Yes.
The best one. Oh, no. Shots fired.
Yeah.
Shots fired.
So I was fresh out of there, though, and, wasn't contributing anything to TSP, no retirement for savings. And the thing they don't tell you at the academy is how much money it takes to start your life off. Even leaving the academy when everything's been given to you, because the classic joke is that academy grads are very good at Navy. They're very good at being officers, but they don't know how to life. And that's one thing the ROTC guys have over us is running a lease, learning how to live out in town, all that stuff. So to get that going, it requires a lot of money, which means at first I wasn't contributing anything to TSP because I needed all that to do things like buy a mattress, have money for a down payment on a lease, stuff like that, or, some type of way to, have that. But then, Carol and I met and she was like, "Oh, are you contributing anything to TSP?" I said, "No." And then, man, did it go from there.
You make it sound like it was a bad thing. What he doesn't mention was that he did not have the best financial education at the academy at the time. And a lot of those things have changed in the last decade. But correct me if I'm wrong, when someone stood up in front of your class and they said, "Don't contribute to TSP, it's all going to go in the G fund and you're just going to be wasting your money anyway. There's better things to invest in," such as, and that's where most people stopped listening because they felt like they're getting pitched to yet again as academy grads. And for me being an ROTC, growing up with the Doug Nordman for my dad and being raised by my parents in the way that I was, so angry that I could not contribute to TSP as a midshipman. I was getting the stipend every month and I wanted to stash as much as it as I could into TSP, but that wasn't allowed. And it wasn't allowed for the academy folks. Even though you're active duty, you have to, no kidding, be commissioned before you can start TSP. And then as soon as I got commissioned, I had 6 weeks of pay problems. I did not get paid for 6 weeks. And it was this weird chain of my paperwork went to the wrong building and that building shredded it instead of sending it to the correct building. It's basically, I learned the right way. I actually had copies of my paperwork with me, finally got me up and running in the system. But those first 6 weeks meant that I missed another 6 weeks in a mid-year commissioning into investing in TSP. So I couldn't invest fully to the max the first year. I just did not make enough money for that. And so when we both started in TSP, we kind of started in the same place, because by the time we met in September of 2014, I was finally getting my pay problems resolved. And that was when you're like, well, why am I contributing to TSP? And that just sort of started off the conversation from there.
Well, it was more of a why should I? I didn't really start contributing until that fall, winter time frame. So it was a couple months, even still after we first met, that took me a while to do the paperwork, figure out the TSP login, all that type of stuff, because you have a boatload of free time being an unqualified ensign on a destroyer. Nothing but free time.
and bandwidth. Good internet, right? I hear about people ordering on Amazon on ships. I'm like, how do you do that? That never worked for me.
And this is going to make me feel a little old, but that was back also when TSP mailed you your first passport.
Oh, yeah. You had to.
Yes.
Doing that from overseas, you had to wait for that mail to arrive from overseas. I'm so glad the new website fixed that, but we're sorry about that.
Yeah. I didn't actually, I didn't know that. I've been telling people you have to wait for it to mail you the password. So that's good to know. I can update my my gouge now.
They fixed that about what, 3 years ago?
When they changed the administrators in 2022 for TSP.
Oh, there we go.
Then they added in two-factor authentication where you could use cell or email. And so that's when they made it so that you could also use email to update the password. And just more recently, I think they took it off cell altogether. I think they took it off of email, but it's one of those situations where they were going in the right direction, then they took a big step backwards again.
So you guys went from not contributing either because of military pay issues or a lack of understanding of the benefits of TSP to achieving financial independence during COVID, time as a dual military couple. What made the difference for you, and how do you motivate other couples to take action to start to achieve their goals with their finances?
Well, at least for me, what helped was learning, and then B, not having time to spend a lot of money being an ensign, but then also the, gradually stepping it up and incrementing it to, when we got married, I think our savings rate jumped to like 60%-ish because dual income, no kids,
Wow.
2 BAHs in Norfolk, and the apartment only cost 1 BAH worth of rent. So there's an entire BAH you can sock away, plus, everything else that was going on, and we just didn't have a lot of time.
Yeah, the hardest thing was that at first we had 4 of everything. And those that have lived and worked on ships understand that you have the stuff you keep at your house on land, and you have the stuff that you keep on the ship. So that was 2 ships, and then initially 2 apartments. You had a roommate, and you had a really good roommate up until we got married. And then unfortunately the roommate said, yeah, I'm not going to third wheel this. I'm just going to do my own thing.
Well, plus, we were all moving anyway. He was moving, we were all moving anyway.
That's true, gas stations and all that jazz. And so when we combined households, that's when we really started super saving, is because by then we had all our stuff in one place rather than 2 places. I was transitioning ships, but you were actually going to an office building. So you no longer needed that second/third place to keep things.
And I was bicycling to and from work. So that was a massive gas savings since we only lived 5 miles from the base.
That was kind of a big thing, was that we chose to deliberately live within 5 miles of base. And it was for a couple of reasons. The first reason was that most bases, at least in the Navy, they tend to be a sketchy area immediately around the base. And so if you go a little bit outside that sketchy zone, there's actually some pretty good stuff, but it tends to not be family friendly. It tends to be apartments. It tends to be condos. It tends to be smaller areas. And when we were in situations where if a hurricane's rolling through and we got to go to the ship, or if we have an overnight duty situation, or whatever the situation was, we wanted to be close enough to the ship that we could get there quickly, but not so close that we felt like we were stuck there all the time. Yeah. You at least had some separation.
Right, that it was part of your, view from your window.
Yeah. And so there is no parking on military bases. I don't know if that's for every single military base or if it's just for the Navy, but there was no parking, except it just so happens that the bicycle rack is like the closest parking, even better than the captain of the ship or the admiral of the ship. And so we quickly figured out, well, hey, let's just start riding our bicycles to and from work. And that turned into a way to work out on the way to work and a way to decompress, just sort of get all the anger out of your day done on the way home, so that when you came home, you were sweaty, you were tired, but you were ready to be home and to take a shower and to settle in for the evening.
When you can combine, a activity that gives you the exercise, gives you that mental break, and it saves money on transportation too. And then, if you have to drive, then you're only 5 miles away. So it's not gonna be that big of a deal if it's, cold and wet and windy or something. I want to drill down on your stats at the time. So how much money, you said about 60% savings rate. Let's put some dollar amounts on it. How much money do you think you were making about a year? What were your expenses like? And then take us through kind of the 5 milestones on your journey so far.
So the easier way to break that down for us was at the micro level. So not necessarily looking at annual income, but monthly income. So I remember making the Excel spreadsheet and looking at a monthly basis. Because honestly, for me, this is maybe me personally being like pure scientist. When you start talking yearly stuff, that becomes too abstract to me. Like, okay, cool, I make $120,000 a year or whatever that number is. It kind of becomes too abstract, and I don't like to amortize across the whole year. I much prefer to do the month to month. Here's what we need to do. And then for those few civic costs like car insurance, amortize that into the budget every month. So that way it looks like, you have more money you do until, of course, the car insurance bill comes due or something like that, the 6 months. But anyway, as dollar figures for us, I mean, I want to say BAH was $1,700 a month for us in Norfolk.
And then base pay for each of us as ensigns came out to about $4,000 a month before you started paying taxes, before you started doing any debt allotment, before you started contributing to TSP. And so I think we would start at about $4,000 a month each.
Yeah, so 8 plus 2, 17 BAHs, you're looking at about $11,000 a month coming into the house, taxes, everything else, take that away. But then the rest of that, I mean, the most expensive thing we had at that point was groceries, and I like to play hockey.
Yeah. It was basically the apartment was $1,700 a month. And I remember that number just because we had to write that by check. They didn't accept any online portals. So
I was so sad when they stopped accepting credit cards to get the cash back and the rewards points.
And I was just like, oh. And then I think the next thing was food. And it was mainly because despite what we say about coming home, a lot of times we were coming home and it was already dark. And so at that point, we're just like, let's go to the place across the street that makes Mexican food. Let's go to the place over here that has Chinese food. And so we were pretty terrible about getting takeout quite often.
That was definitely our weakness.
Yeah.
We definitely had made an honest effort to cook more, we probably could have saved even more money. But
and this was pre-pandemic. So I would say maybe about $500 a month were spent on food.
Yeah.
Give or take.
Yeah,
and
there's only two of us at that point.
Yeah, it was only the two of us, and it was easy to just grab something quickly than it was to try to get the ingredients, bring them home, bake them all, store them later, pick them up the next day.
Mm-hmm.
Apartment was most expensive. The food was the next most expensive thing. I'd say hobbies was number 3 because it was either buying surfboards or you were playing ice hockey at the time. That was a really good, not only a workout, but a camaraderie thing for you. And it was nice because you were out on the ice and you were having a good time in this no-check league. And I was in the stands with all the spouses and we were having our own, women's night in the stand, basically, as all the men folk were playing hockey.
Yeah.
That was really our entertainment was, yes, we had subscription services. This was also, when Netflix was the big thing, followed by HBO Max was like the next big thing. And so we didn't really spend much on things like you had a Jetta, Volkswagen Jetta, and I had some form of CRV or RAV4, like a mid-size SUV car.
And both cars cost about $30 to fill up, and we filled up once every other week.
Yeah, exactly.
So because of all the biking we were doing to work, you just didn't need gas. So
And what about your retirement contributions? When did you start maxing those out?
I'd say
2015.
2015 was the first year that we were, because we both commissioned in the summer of 2014. And so by the time we got a full years of pay was 2015, we were maxing it out then. And then 2015, I was just gone. My ship was overseas at the time. I spent 10 out of 12 months in 2015 underway. And so when you're underway on a ship, there's no streaming services. So I turned that off. You still had yours on.
And then, the hardest, I think the most expensive purchase in 15, other than, saving for retirements, was your engagement ring.
Yeah, the engagement ring. And the trips, we met up in New York City at one point. You flew over to Spain at another point.
Yeah, right. But other than that, because we're both unqualified ensigns, you're not spending a lot of money, time.
We autopiloted everything. So we were maxing TSP. We were maxing our Roth IRAs. I think the max was like 5,000 or 5,500 per Roth IRA at the time.
I'd have to go back and look.
We don't remember. We just, what's the max? Yes, that much. And then we moved on with our lives. We just didn't make it hard.
It was easier, especially after learning in 2014 about everything. This is something Carol taught me. It was easier to start as if you didn't have that money and maxing it out and getting that mindset early. So that way you could automatically start socking it away. That way, bare bones minimum, it was, I think at time, for instance, it was like 27, 28% of your base pay. So that way you could just automatically start throwing that in there. So right off the bat, you're starting at 28% savings.
And then after all of that, you've maxed out the TSP and you've maxed out the Roth IRA. We would do our monthly thing. We would buy groceries, we would put gas in the cars, we would pay our rent, and we would still have a little bit of money left over. And we're just like, what are we going to do with this stuff? And so we would just put that in our taxable brokerage accounts. And for the fun of it, we got competitive with it. So we would each choose our own investments in our brokerage accounts, and we would see who could contribute more to our brokerage accounts. And we were pretty evenly split on the bills. It wasn't like you take the rent, I take the groceries, and I have more money to put in the brokerage account. We were very good about keeping that even.
Yeah.
And so the brokerage account was just about who could do a better job picking the funds.
But definitely for a lot of it, it was the mindset and even still, once we had ARIA, keeping that mindset of making sure you keep at very, very minimum, making sure you keep maxing out your TSP, because you've already been maxing out at this point. So you might as well just keep doing that. And that way it helps, as you transition from being DINK to actually, having dependents and more expenses that come with babies and everything else all the joys and sleepless nights that they'll bring. You already at least are on autopilot for that stuff. So it's not hard to get from 26, 28, whatever your payment is to get there up to the 40% to really hit the savings.
Especially when you're on deployment and you just aren't spending that money. And when we're both on deployment at the same time or...
Well, yeah, that was back when we were DINK. But when I was deployed, I still don't think you spent that much money, after you got out.
Right.
I think I was still I mean, just from getting a hotel room to get off the ship for one night when we were deployed.
Yeah, I think that was really the most expensive thing for us was moving. It was that pre and post move where you packed up everything and you're in a hotel, or you are about to move in and you're in a hotel. If the concept of PCSing was a lot better at reimbursing us faster, we probably would not have seen that difference. We would not have seen that temporary loss that you get, or building up the credit card that you get from the nature of PCS by itself. I think that's a very long-winded way to say that we were getting about net $2,500 a month, and then we would probably spend $2,000 of it. So we would still have that extra $500 every month that we would shove into taxable brokerage.
Yeah.
Because we'd already done TSP and we'd already done our Roth IRAs.
I mean, that's something that we talk about a lot on the podcast, is just setting up the automation. And then, if you spend whatever's less or whatever's left over, then you've already done the heavy lifting. You've already done the heavy savings. And I mean, the numbers here are quite incredible. So correct me if I'm wrong, but you guys both graduated without any student loans.
Correct.
And you were able to hit your lean fi number in 2018, just 4 years after you commissioned. So take us through, okay, first of all, what is your concept of lean fi, and how did you arrive at your number? And then what other numbers are you aiming for next?
Our lean fi number at the time was 800,000. So this was pre-pandemic. This was pre-kids. This was while we were still living on the East Coast. I think one of the biggest money shocks we had was when we moved from the East Coast to the West Coast, and instantly our BH doubled. We're like, oh God, what are we about to get into? And sure enough, we went from $1,700 a month in Virginia to $3,400 a month in California. And if that didn't give us an idea of what the West Coast was going to be like, nothing else would have. And so
I will say West Coast proved particularly difficult to have a high savings rate just with the cost of living in California. Not that I'm knocking anything or anything like that for political wise, but it was a challenge in California.
It was. And so when we made these numbers in Virginia in 2018, the lean fi number was 800,000. And that's when we opened up your TSP and my TSP, after we got the letters in the mail for the new passcodes, because we hadn't opened them forever. After we got all those things lined up, we're like, oh my God, we have more than $800,000 right now. When did this happen? And that's when it's realized, it's like, oh yeah, I have like 19 and some change of sea duty at that point. You had almost 3 years of sea duty at that point. There was a lot.
And then the Navy was paying for my master's at that point. So I was about to get a graduate degree
on top of that
with no cost. Well, at least no loan, no debt anyway coming out of that.
That's really what precipitated this whole conversation, was the classic dual mill problem of what duty station are we going to next? Because we were dating in two different duty stations. You were in Virginia, I was in Spain, and then I went back to South Carolina and then eventually to Virginia. So we were finally living together, like a year after we'd gotten married. And we were in that point where we were about to PCS again, and it was going to be negotiating. In the Navy, we call them detailers, with where we're going to go next. And I was reaching my 5-year mark. And as a surface warfare officer, I was exhausted. All my swells out there. I know what you mean. We were looking at the possibility of me lateral transferring away from surface warfare into something called Civil Engineering Corps. But the problem with that was that it was going to be an even smaller community, which meant even less base options. You were already into information professional. You were already working communications. So there's a very specific pathway you had to follow.
And enjoying my job, which, I think for you, that was also a big driving factor, is not enjoying the. Anyway, that's more retention discussion, not really financial discussion.
And that was the thing. The Navy was offering me a 6-figure bonus to stay in. I'm like, no one does that. What is so wrong that they have to offer a 6-figure bonus? And so that's when we opened up all the accounts, realized we're lean fine. I think that was the first time we said, maybe I could go to the reserves and maybe we could talk about starting a family. And by me going into the reserves, that meant you could go to the detailer and say, hey, I want Naval Postgraduate School. And that would pay for his master's degree. It's like, well, that done. Let's do that.
Yeah. And I will say one of the benefits of having that high of a savings rate, being able to save all that, was a ability to ask the question, wait, why are they giving me this bonus? Why are you saying you're going to throw this money at me? So it helped kind of, I don't want to say broaden the horizons, but maybe ask the deeper questions as to why money was being thrown at problems, and analyze really, on the personal level, whether we wanted that agreement or not.
Right. Whether you wanted to sign that contract or in the surface warfare community, we call it blood money. Why do you want to take that blood money?
We're familiar with that in the Air Force pilot world too. But it sounds like what I'm hearing is that because of the high savings rate that you had and the sacrifices you made, like biking to work when you were young, before starting a family, growing your family, getting stationed together, things like that, that enabled you to have a frank conversation about what do we want in our future that may not have been possible or the same conversation had you had no money in savings or no money in your TSP.
Yes, for
Exactly.
sure. That's definitely a good summation.
Yes, because I tried to imagine we had moved from Virginia to California to Naval Postgraduate School. We had done that move in the summer of 2019. And had we decided that it was going to be both of us staying in, both of us getting our master's degrees, then there would have been a chance that after that tour, I would have gone right back to a ship. And you did go to a ship right after that tour. You went straight from Naval Postgraduate School down to San Diego on a ship. And I can't imagine having done that while we had a baby at home. I was actually really glad that I had taken myself out of the active duty line. And it just so happened that our timing worked out that we had a baby about 6 months after we arrived in California.
Yeah.
The same morning the movers arrived in Virginia was the morning I found that I was pregnant. And if that's not military, I don't know what is. And so it was one of those moments where when everything started locking down, our baby was exactly 2 months old. She had literally just gotten her 2-month-old vaccines, the ones that the pediatrician says, okay, now you can go to the grocery store together. Now you can go to the beach together. Now, and California's like, nope, can't go to the beach. Nope, got to wear a mask to the grocery store. Nope, only a limited number of people that can go here. Nope, you got to put on an appointment to go into different places that ordinarily you just walk into. And so I can't imagine we watched other parents do dual naval postgraduate school, 2 degrees and babies, or even elementary aged kids. We had roving gangs of 8-year-olds on bicycles in the military neighborhood that we were living in. It was just so locked down. Mm-hmm. But because we had the money, I could just become the full-time stay-at-home parent. And in September of 2020, 6 months into the pandemic, I actually said to the reserves, I said, I don't need you guys anymore. By that point, we had not only been above 800,000, we had crossed 1 million during that lockdown. We had crossed 1 million during that, that dip in the market in March of 2020 where the market just goes like this and then it goes like, when we came on the upside, we're like, wait, we're at 1 million? When? What? No, I can only get 4 hours of sleep and we have $1 million? Like, how did that, what? So,
and thus iterating, money does not buy sleep.
No, it does not. It really did not. But it was nice that I could take our baby around the neighborhood, multiple times a day. I could do the nap times, the changes. And then when you got off of class, we would just switch. It was like standing watch. We basically I had it, you got it, we changed off. And you actually were able to take your classes, don't tell us professors, you were able to take your classes on Teams on your phone and stick your phone on the stroller and just walk for I think you said your record was 10 miles in a day if you had all your classes in one day?
Yeah, one loop around the neighborhood was about 2 miles. And so if you do that a few times, you'll rack up the mileage quick. But anyway, much to the earlier point, I was doing a lot of sacrifices early on.
Yeah. It sounds like you guys were quite united as a couple. And I'm sure you've encountered other dual military couples who are screwing this up because, it sounds like dual military is really a cheat code to building wealth in the military. Now, that being said, there's lots of downsides to being dual military, as you kind of alluded to, with not being assigned to the same base and one being on a ship while the other one's at home. How do you see other dual military couples screwing this up? Like, it should be a layup. It should be an easy putt here, but not everybody has $1 million in their investments.
It's tough because I sometimes hesitate to say they're screwing it up, but it's definitely I think it's falling victim to the pressures of being, at least for the dual mil couples we know, they're officers, but falling to the pressure of being an officer. Sometimes people expect that officers drive the nicest cars or they do the nicest things or they have the best quality of life. And, I think more often than not, the ones that are doing it right, you can tell because they drive the, 10, 15-year-old car that beat up at first. The officer parking lot typically has the worst shaped cars on the waterfront. So I think for a lot of it is just falling victim to what is the perceived what an officer should be doing. I use air quotes on that one. But, I think so that causes a high cost of living. So which obviously drives down your savings rate at that point. That would be probably number one thing I see.
I had bought my own car outright. I had paid $4,200 in 2012 for a 1999 Honda CR-V. And the turning radius on that thing, the the screech that it would give off every time you turned on that
Okay,
car.
I was scared to drive that car by the end. so maybe don't.
Yes.
Probably about like maneuvering a destroyer, I'm guessing.
But that was the thing, right? Was that car mostly sat on a ship pier somewhere. If there wasn't a cat trying to get into the engine from the underside, there was bird poop trying to drop all over it from the top.
I mean, I remember thinking though when we were dating and I was driving that car, oh, for the love of God, don't lose a hubcap. We're not married. Don't lose a wheel. We're not married yet. I don't know how she's going to respond.
Right. And maybe that's why we bicycled, was because you didn't trust my car.
There may be some truth to that.
There may be some, but that was part of the no debt thing. Was you had a career starter loan at first, but within the first year of you being an ensign, you actually paid that off because it was a super low interest rate. But
it took a couple of years for that.
Took a couple of years.
Yeah, it took
Okay.
a couple of years. That's right. I forgot about that career star loan. But yeah, that took a couple of years.
But that was like what, a 2% interest rate, which is,
Oh no, it was like 0.5%.
yeah, it was half a
When
percent.
offered to the academies from Navy Federal or USA.
My captain had pulled something that was questionably illegal and said that none of us were allowed to have a career starter loan. So I never had a career starter loan. You were given a career starter loan, and that was the loan that was supposed to be buying the furniture for your first apartment, getting that car so you get to your first duty station, and all those things that you needed to start up your career. And so if there was any debt to take out, that was exactly the kind of debt to take out. But neither one of us had real car loans. We still don't have real car loans. We both bought new cars, and we bought them outright in cash. We're not collectors. We are terrible at collecting things other than cables, like USB-C and USB-A cables, just for all.
Okay, well, that just might be my IT problem.
Exactly.
Being a hoarder.
We have the IT problem. We're not collecting things that have to be PCSed. We don't have an extensive collection of hats or cups, or I think the biggest collection we have is challenge coins, but even then we can fit those in like a little pencil case in between moves. But we weren't spending money on objects. We were spending money on taking trips to places and eating food together.
Now that I will anchor on for a second. For the two of us, the reason why some of this works is both of us are very utilitarian.
Yes.
If it does not have a utility for us, it's gotten rid of and no longer funded. Sometimes I wish the budget worked that way, but both of us are very utilitarian in that unless it brings value in the form of some like tool, equipment, making our job easier on the house, aka like a robot vacuum that we bought, which is wonderful.
Anybody who has toddlers and has seen the way that they go about the house with goldfish completely understands a robot vacuum.
But that does help is our very utilitarian natures, because both of us are used to living in very small spaces on the ship. You don't have a lot of space, so you can't keep trinkets, knickknacks, a whole bunch of stuff that just provides no value but looks nice. So both of us have that strong mindset. So, I mean, that helps cut down on our cost a lot, because it will turn into a conversation of, is the utility we're going to get out of this worth the value of the money we're going to spend? And that's a good question that we ask as we start weighing big purchases.
One of the things that we've always valued has been communication. We've always valued paying the higher level for the monthly cell phone bill or having the better connectivity for data. And it's one of those things that I think has helped us stay together, is because we're able to communicate with each other and talk with each other whenever we wanted to.
Yeah.
How early in the relationship were you having intense questions or conversations about money? It sounds like it came up pretty early in your relationship.
I think date two is when it started.
We're not normal. Let me start off with that.
For the record, though, I knew that this was going to last, after the first date. So, it just took you a while to catch up.
It took me a while to catch up. It was like, this cannot be true. I did not believe this was happening.
Yeah.
But I think one of the big things that came up early in the conversation was, how we grew up. And it's all of those questions around getting to know each other. And you talked a lot about the way that you were raised, with your dad still going through his PhD track and your mom holding down multiple jobs just to keep the household running. You were happy, welcoming, but you weren't expected at the time that you came.
Right. I mean, growing up in poverty as a kid helped, because it was definitely a motivation of, man, I don't want to live like that. And then once my father definitely got a better job, it took my parents a while to pull themselves out of their own debt, let alone be able to afford college. So that was definitely a big motivation. I love my parents dearly, and they had great money habits for survival of, eliminate credit card debt, don't spend more than you make, the basic fundamental rules. But in terms of long-term investing and how to save for retirement, that was something I definitely learned from Carol and Doug.
And that was part of how that conversation started early, was it's like, well, I was raised by a guy who writes on financial independence for the military. And as part of that, yes, there were some things I totally ignored at first. I think it took me 3 or 4 years to actually read The Simple Path to Wealth, even though my dad gave me a copy as soon as the book came out. But it was one of those things where, in explaining to you, I said, yeah, my dad writes all these books on military financial independence and stuff like that. You actually looked up the books and you looked up his stuff online and you started reading it on your own. And that was like a big green flag of, this is going to work. This is going to be amazing. There was one time, I think it was 10 or 11 months after we met. And my parents were big into slow traveling by then. So they were doing space age military, and they would start on Oahu in Hawaii, and they would hop to the West Coast, hop to the East Coast, and hop over to Spain. And because I was living in Spain and I was stationed on a ship in Spain, I gave them the code to my keys, the little lockbox that you have somewhere. And they would stay in my house for 2, 3, 4 months at a time while I was out underway. During one of those slow travels, there was a hurricane inbound to Norfolk. And so they were stuck in Norfolk. And it was one of those moments where like, well, while we're in Norfolk, is there anyone you think you should see? And I think you were actually the one that said, well, yeah, why don't we come meet for the first time? I'm just like, but I'm not here. This is not gonna, no, oh my God, my boyfriend and my parents are gonna meet and I'm not gonna be there. And I just had to sit quietly on a ship being like, okay, I hope this goes okay. I hope they don't kill each other. I hope this all works. I hope this is, and it was okay.
It was
Trial by combat.
Right. I mean, you put 3
like
academies in the same room, it was going to be okay.
Yeah. That was the other thing was my dad was class of 1982 at the academy. My mom was class of 1983 at the academy. That's how they met. And you were class of 2014 at the academy. And I said, thank you all. I'm going to have fun in college. And that's how I did ROTC.
The great foundation that you guys have, the communication, the dual income, dual military setup. What would you say to the listener that's rolling their eyes and thinking, well, of course it works when you're a dink, and this kind of financial independent stuff would never work for me. Maybe their spouse is dragging them, forcing them to listen to this podcast while they're in the car together, PCSing or something. How do you message that it's possible for other people, or is it possible for other non-dinks?
So I would definitely say it's possible, and nothing is ever impossible. But to those that are rolling their eyes or struggling with it, it may take you longer because you're not dink or there are other financial situations you have going on, higher cost of living and whatnot. But it still is achievable. It may just be a different timeline, not as fast or a little bit longer or, whatever the personal situation may be. But that's probably how I would respond to that is it's achievable. It may just not be as fast as we were able to do it being dink.
And that was one of the things that I saw in ROTC was I saw a lot of prior enlisted that would come through the program and they already have a spouse and multiple kids. Or I would see folks that were going through college, but they may have already had a child of their own or already had a spouse or a significant other of their own. And that was part of the reason that they were in ROTC was because most academies, I'm pretty sure all the academies don't allow you to have a dependent. And so for a lot of these folks, that was one thing they had to be aware of. One of the fellow midshipmen for me in particular, she was the elder sister by about 12 years. And so she had to juggle college with literally babysitting her younger sister while their mom was working overnight shifts, trying to keep the family, trying to pay for college and everything else that was going on. And so for her, that was one of the other little things that she had to take in both for financial and for time in her budget was figuring out how to get all these things done. It's hard to deal with that. But the flip side of that is that you know how to discipline and you know how to hunker down for a month or 2 or 3 to try and take on a new skill and to then branch out from there. And we had our own, not exactly rules, but trends that we created. I mean, we had no problem going in and buying new Xboxes,
Yeah.
But usually what would happen is you would buy it through GameStop and you would trade in the old Xbox, which would give you some kind of credit. And so that was one less thing to move with. You would trade in any of the games that weren't forward or backwards compatible for the games that you actually wanted to play.
But back to the utility thing, the old one didn't provide any utility, so get rid of it and move on to the next thing. But that way then it helps cut the cost of it.
And we were willing to spend money. We buy the $3,000 mattress because we spend, when we can, we spend hours and hours sleeping on it. And so we might as well make sure that we're getting a good night's sleep so that we're not spending money on coffee in the morning trying to wake ourselves back up. Because we were bicycling into work, we spent less time at the gym than most people do. And also because we were on ships at the time, ships had gyms. And so we didn't have gym memberships until our daughter was 1 or 2 years old.
Yeah, I think San Diego was
the first time we had it, and our daughter's a year old.
actually 23 when we joined the Y's.
Right,
Yeah,
and it was for swim lessons for her. It wasn't even for the gym, really.
Which kind of fell flat, but she didn't like to swim.
Yeah, that was irony.
Irony of coming from a swimmer and 2 surfers. because I swam through high school.
But I think one of the big things we're trying to say is that by reducing the amount of things that we had to take care of and the amount of stuff we had to take care of, we found that we naturally had more money. We had what we needed to have. We needed to have cars. We couldn't just live on bicycles. We tried. It's not doable, even with electric bikes. So we knew we had to have cars, but maybe we could spend more time on bicycles than we could on cars.
Well, and I mean, we did go down to one car in Monterey, which helped because we knew I was bicycling to class for the brief time we were allowed to attend in-person class. But that helped because we went down to one car. So there goes the cost of an entire vehicle.
That's why we chose base housing while we were in Monterey. Those were the other big decisions we made. Was we initially were living together in apartments. And then at one point we moved into base housing because we heard the community was better. And absolutely that was correct. We had to stay 6 feet away from each other thanks to the pandemic. But it was good to have that community together and to see that we weren't alone in this in a neighborhood full of folks that didn't understand the military. As much as we enjoyed being with the community, we did not like being submitted to multiple sets of shutdown, lockdown rules. And so we moved out of the base housing, but we moved into military-friendly areas where maybe, 3 or 4 houses down the street had somebody else that was also military. And so every duty station was a chance to try something different. And we would take that opportunity to hone in what our values were and to figure out exactly what mattered to us. And we would spend the money there.
Just a quick note from one of our sponsors, and we'll be right back to the show. Hey, Spencer, I've heard about this free Amex Platinum card for military service members. Where can I go to learn more about this?
Great question, Jamie. I've got the Ultimate Military Credit Cards course at militarymoneymanual.com/UMC3. It's a 100% free email-based course, and I explain exactly how to verify your eligibility for credit card annual fee waivers with the Military Lending Act, or MLA, and the Service Members Civil Relief Act, or SCRA. The Ultimate Military Credit Cards course is a beginner's guide to travel hacking and opening up your first annual fee-waived credit card while you or your spouse serves in the U.S. military. There's no spam, no fluff, and the only emails you'll get from me are related to military credit cards. You can unsubscribe at any time, and there's zero cost to you to sign up. You can sign up right now for free at militarymoneymanual.com/UMC3. Again, militarymoneymanual.com/Uniform Mike Charlie 3.
And now back to the show. What about for the dual military couples where one spouse might not be on board yet? It sounds like you guys were in pretty good alignment and a good pair, but it doesn't always work out like that for military couples, whether dual or not. How do you talk about your values in a way that might be meaningful to your spouse to convince them to get on board, for lack of a better term?
We didn't try to restrict each other at all.
Yeah, I know that's true. I'm just trying to think of, who's a good example of that without naming names.
We've heard of couples where they would say things like, oh, you can't do this or you can't do that because we're doing this thing together, you're doing that thing together. And what we had more conversations around was what we were going to do with that thing. There's this thing I was on an aircraft carrier at one point. In an aircraft carrier, you have a wardroom of 150 plus officers. It was massive compared to a destroyer where the crew might be 200, let alone just the 40 or so officers you had on board.
300. But yeah.
300. We'll talk about manning issues in the Navy a different day. But one of the things that would happen is inevitably every underway, someday between the first and third day underway, you would see some officer come down to the wardroom and they would have some level of exhaustion, anger, frustration, defeat in their faces. And you would say, well, what happened? And I remember one of the officers saying to me, well, my wife finally did it. She bought the Nordic 3000 treadmill that we said we weren't going to buy. And she bought it as soon as I got underway because I couldn't complain about it. And I said, I don't know what to tell you because it sounds like that's something that was really important to her. So why not have purchased that, especially if that meant that you knew she was going to spend all her time underway on the treadmill instead of what other activities could have been spending a lot of money.
Yeah, I think that's what it boils down to, those game playing choices that you make for purchases that you make. Is this $3,000 Nordic track or, $5,000 purchase or $20,000 purchase worth the extra 6 months to a year it's going to cost you to work to get the savings rate back? I think that's probably a good way to phrase that. That'd be probably the best advice for those couples where one's on board and one's not. Dual military otherwise, just if one's on board and one's not, I would say that's probably the best way to look at that is the cost of whatever it is you're about to buy. Is that worth the extra 6, 8, 9, 10, whatever, however many months it takes in salary to pay that off, plus whatever you lose in interest of what you could have been saving already?
Exactly. And every time we had more money, we felt like we had more options. And I think for someone who had grown up in poverty and someone who just was chomping at the bit to have more options mattered way more than anything else.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, I love how you guys prioritized options and you recognize your freedom of choice very early on. Like with that $800,000 lean fi or coast fi number, it provided the freedom to ask really important questions and to realize that Carol could leave active duty and you guys could lose that paycheck and you were going to be fine. And there are so many couples out there that they just keep grinding and they don't even take a look at the situation or think about the situation and realize how much freedom of choice they actually have. And we don't need to pay $4,000 a month for childcare because one of us could stop working who wants to stop working and we'll be fine. And how much stress does that reduce? How much joy does that bring into the family? But if you never just sit down and ask the question, but first of all, you have to do the hard work, right? And build the savings. And that's what you guys were able to do.
Right. And definitely watching my parents. That was something where I learned early on, as much as, first half of my childhood, they didn't make a lot of money. And the second half, by the time, my father was making more money, the options are limited because now, yes, he's making more money so we can afford some better things. And, we did, but your options are limited because now you got to pay off all that debt, so you don't really have a choice. The loan's got to get paid from the bank or wherever the debt may have been and resided.
We used to play this game on active duty called Love or Money. Pick a person. Are they here in the military because they love it? Or are they here because they need the money? And it was very interesting to see how that correlated with personality and how that correlated with attitude in the military as well. There were a lot of folks where the chillest, happiest people to be there were the ones that were not doing this for the money. They just wanted to be there. And so you wanted to work with them because they were chill and happy and there for the mission and not there for trying to figure out how to do the least amount of work for the paycheck that they're already going to get anyway.
Oh, that's really good. It sounds like avoiding debt and starting saving early on was instrumental to you guys building your wealth. I think there's a lot of military people that are maybe looking at the spreadsheets. And Ken, I know you mentioned computer science. How does someone that has that type of mindset that is trying to optimize everything about their lives and what's utilitarian and what's not useful to us pay cash for a car when they could do better in the stock market if they just invested that $50,000 or $40,000 instead? How did you wrestle with that? And how does avoiding debt help you guys get to the position you are now?
If I could do it over again, I probably wouldn't have purchased my first car the way I did. If I'm being totally honest here, because a lot of that came from the career starter loan and being a young, dumb midshipman before, meeting Carol and Doug. If I could do it over, actually, I probably wouldn't have. I would have definitely pushed more into the market and bought something lesser, something lesser for that. But for what it boils down for me is just, again, it comes down to the utilitarian use of it. Do you need wheels? Do you need to be able to move and have basically mobility and not over the long run losing money on the interest you're going to pay to some loan or something like that if you can't afford one in cash right up front? So that's really kind of what it boils down to for me.
There was this point where we were 2 or 3 years into the military. You were on deployment and I was at home and I was still stationed in South Carolina because I was going through Navy Nuclear Propulsion Power School for short. There was this fascinating thing I was watching where in every parking lot at Power School, everybody that had the same car would deliberately line up together. That's what nukes do. Anyone who has seen a bunch of nukes in a room, they get it. And so we had the Camaro line. That was the year that the Transformers Camaros had just been upgraded. So we had a line of cars that bought Camaros. We had a line of the Ford F-150 Raptor lifted, kitted out trucks. We had a line of the Subaru Crosstreks for some reason. A lot of people went and bought Subaru Crosstreks. And it was colors of the rainbows. You had every color of the Skittle colors going on in that line too. And then there would be this whole smattering of all these other cars in the parking lot. And there was one day where we were all stressed out because nuclear power school, you're taking a test every single week. And it's a subject that you've been working on for 20, 30, 40 hours that week when you're going to take the test. And everyone's stressed out about this one particular test. And this one guy's got his head between his hands and he's just staring at the page. And I forgot how we got in the conversation, but he's just like, I can't do this. I'm like, so why don't you just quit? And he says, I can't give back my bonus. I said, why can't you give back your bonus? He said, my bonus is parked in the parking lot right now. Yeah, you might not be able to quit right now. I don't know how you're going to pay back that bonus because as frustrating as it can be to feel like you have to pay back a car loan or pay back credit cards, we can all universally agree on that paying back the military is the hardest kind of debt we've ever had.
Thankfully, that's not something I've ever had to pay back. But I see a lot of horror stories on Reddit about DFAST debts, and especially the most annoying ones are the ones you don't even know about, and until they show up on your credit history as delinquent, or you get a call from a collections agency that's trying to collect on the debt. So yeah,
I had that unfortunately my first entry into the Navy too. Talk about pay issues real quick. I collected BH when I shouldn't have as an ensign at one point. So that started off an immediate, well, you owe DFAST the money back. So we're going to start a collection plan. Fortunately, they did it at the rate of $50 a month. So it wasn't horrible, but it was definitely a oops as an ensign. I didn't know that. So here you go.
I had a sailor once who had gone to mast, and he had been reduced in rank and given a half month's pay for 2 months, and DFAST screwed it up. They took away all his pay in 1 month. And I remember thinking to myself, oh, thank goodness we have an emergency fund, so that if the next government shutdown came down, then we would actually have money to work with while we were dealing with the shutdown and not feeling like we were trapped working without money.
Again, back to the freedom thing, the freedom of maneuver that the emergency fund provides is it's hard to overstate. Are there any tactical apps or websites that you both used on your journey to financial independence, or even Google Sheets or Excel are acceptable answers?
Yeah, Google Sheets, Excel, and then the banking apps typically. Those just to keep track of everything. It's only been recently that you've been able to, through your job, use some of the real hardcore higher power apps and stuff like that.
For most of our careers, it was Excel spreadsheets. And what would happen is we're way too busy. So we would spend the first 1 to 4 months, and that's because we would do it for 2 billing cycles. San Diego Water, for example, they bill every other month. So we needed to wait 4 months to see what 2 billing cycles look like. And so we would add up after those first 1 to 4 months what our bills were. And if we felt like anything was too expensive or we felt like something was weird, that we would focus on fixing that first. But after those first 1 to 4 months, we're like, we're too busy. We know what our budget is. We're going to start anti-budgeting. And so that's when we knew we were going to pay TSP first. We're going to pay Roth IRA first. We're going to pay our bills, have some fun. And then we were going to put the extra money in the brokerage account afterwards. Yes, we had those spreadsheets, but we didn't keep them for every single month or every single year that we were on active duty. We just know that we can look back and say, yeah, we maxed out TSP in 2015 and 2016 and 2018. And then, yeah, we maxed out our Roth IRAs. And I think you did in 14 too. Were you Roth IRA?
No.
But 15?
No, that was 16.
16. So 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. And through now, we're still maxing out our Roth IRAs every year.
Yeah.
But yeah, it has been somewhat of a slow process at the very beginning, and sometimes it's hard to see at the beginning the ray of light at the end of getting to having that freedom of maneuver. But at the beginning, it can definitely look arduous.
For us, the first 100K is always the hardest. That phrase is really true because you don't believe it when it first happens. And then 100 somehow turned to 200. I don't even remember when that happened. It just happened.
Yeah.
And same thing with 3 and 4 and 5 and 6. And then at some point it was 8. And then it was $1 million. It was like, well, thanks, but $1 million doesn't change this pandemic we're in the middle of. It keeps going.
Yeah.
It somehow keeps going. But that first 100K was definitely the hardest.
I think you guys have some foundational habits that started earlier in your relationship. It sounds like you mentioned communication, being on the same page with goals. Can you give some advice for military spouses, dual military couples specifically, that maybe is a little bit outside of the financial realm, but affects it as well? How do you make time for each other when you're both working full time, whether you have kids or not? What are some ways that you guys did that helps keep you guys on the same page where you have a united mindset on the same goals, working towards the same financial independence objective for each other?
I remember being in Istanbul, Turkey. We were on a port call. This was about 3 days before some of the locals in Istanbul attacked the crew, but it was calm at the time. And I was out on the edge of the destroyer. It's 1 o'clock in the morning, but I knew that was going to match up with I can't remember if it was evening or morning at the time.
Evening, I think.
Evening.
Yeah.
So you were off work by then. And so it was 1 o'clock in the morning. I am absolutely exhausted, but I still picked up my cell phone and we still called, and it made everything so much better every time that I got to talk to you.
Yeah. Or like on deployment, where I was able to finally iMessage this last deployment. You get off watch at midnight and you have to be up at 5 a.m. to start your day again, but forcing yourself to take that extra 20, 30 minutes to message, to call home, to talk, to, forcing is probably the wrong verb there, but
it's that moment where you think to yourself, I really want to go to bed, but I also really want to say hi.
Yeah,
and you just
right.
give yourself you just say to yourself, I'm just going to do this for 20 minutes. And an hour later, you're like, I'm so glad I did this.
But a priest told me this the best way, and I'm going to borrow his quote for this one. You have to wake up and choose each other. If you don't, it's never going to work. that's the foundational thing of everything, of forcing to, again, I use that word forcing. I gotta stop using the word, but choosing to take the extra time, lose a little bit more sleep to make a call. Choosing, you're both dead tired, getting home at 20 to 2100, but stopping to have that financial conversation, to look at the Excel sheet, to look at the numbers, to look at that type of stuff. Choosing to drive to an event together, even though it may be a little bit harder to meet somewhere, to hop in one car to drive to the event together, just to give you the time to talk while you're driving.
Yeah.
Basically, it's kind of choosing ways to give yourself time, to give us time as a couple to talk and catch up. Like even now, our daughter goes to bed at 7:30.
After, she comes in and out and in and out and in and out and in and out.
So she's asleep by 8. So it's, 8 to 9 o'clock is our time. What do we need to catch up on? What do we need to strategize? What do we need to game plan? I love playing chess, so I'm usually all about the strategy and what the long-term stuff is, impacts are. But that's basically that hour is for us to communicate what's priority, what's not priority, what do we have coming up, what do we not have coming up, what can be load shed, that type of stuff.
And there's a little bit of benefit of us being dual Navy, because in the Navy, there's this concept called command by negation. And what that is I give you an order and you're going to execute that order until I tell you no. And so one of the things that we always did was, if it was an emergency, we would handle it first and then we would come back and tell the other what happened. And so I forgot exactly what had happened, but something had gone wrong with my car. And it was the point where it was finally time to say goodbye to that Honda CR-V. And I needed to buy a new to me car. And so I went out and I took $11,000 and I wrote a check for a Toyota RAV4 that was sitting at one of the used car lots right next to the power school. And I told him afterwards, I said, hey, my car popped that check engine light. Rather than trying to go back and forth with some mechanic somewhere, I just dropped $11,000 to get a new car.
Yeah.
And your answer was?
I think it was something along the lines of, cool, hope you enjoy it. I'm glad you're able to do it.
Because you had talked and set expectations ahead of time, and that is so powerful for couples. Dual military is such a challenge. My wife and I did about 4 years of that, and she's in the hospital working nights, weekends, holidays, dealing with terrible patients and their families, and I'm on the road flying missions all over the world, leaving with short notice, not knowing when I'm going to be back. And it is a really, real difficult situation for a lot of couples, and it's a very powerful opportunity when you have those boundaries set up, the communication, the expectations, and the agreement that we're in this together because we're looking towards the same future. What's the future that you guys are looking at as you work towards Fat Fire? What do you want retirement to look like? Is that just the number on the spreadsheet for you? Or is there a why that you guys are jointly working towards that's more powerful than that?
We can't believe that the numbers keep getting bigger. So at this point, we're like, well, screw it. Let's see if we can get to 5 million. And that's literally the decision path, which is let's see if that can happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely more of a vision of what do we want in the future. We don't want to worry about money ever. So that's kind of a big driving force. And then the ability to kind of choose our days and choose our own adventures and do what we want. So I know 2 of us have this dream of, once Arya's off in school and kind of more self-sufficient, being able
when she's independent.
Yeah. Well, being able to wake up in the morning, go surf, instead of having to go to work, but go surf with Doug, then have the rest of the day to choose what we want to do. Either whether it's housework, because yes, unfortunately, yard work still needs to get done, or being able to, hey, let's go to Thailand for a couple weeks, or let's go to Japan or something like that.
You were on deployment and you were going to have a long port call, and anybody in the Navy knows that's always hit or miss, but you're going to have a long port call in Singapore. So me and a fellow Navy spouse, we were our travel buddies to get each other to Singapore. But once we got to Singapore, we found our husbands. You actually had some time off.
Yeah.
And we actually got to spend some child-free time in Singapore. But that was a lot of saving ahead of that to make sure that we could afford the opposite side of the world plane tickets, 17 hours of flying from California over to Singapore. And so I think that we've learned from our own careers that time together and the experiences together, they matter way more than the stuff in between. And so as we're going forth in the future, we're not looking to live in the richy rich neighborhoods. We're not looking forward to having 15 rental properties. We understand that as ship maintainers, we understand what that means and how much work that is. And so what we focus on is the things that we can do together and enjoy together. I think surfing has always been a big part of that as well for us, is that there was one morning in Virginia where the power was out at the apartment complex. Literally, the cable to the apartment complex had fallen off the pole and into the river next to the apartment complex. And we just looked at each other and we looked at our lack of power and we said, well, now's a good time to go surfing. We'll let everybody else figure out how to get the electricity back on. Let's go grab a pair of surfboards and get in the car and just escape to the beach.
Yeah, I think the motto was to the beach. And the hardest time we had was we lived on the 4th floor. And so we had to work the surfboards down around the stairwell, since obviously the elevator is not working.
Right, because that was hard. But we had all that experience that we had on ships. So this is how we worked together to pass the board down each staircase and then start from the top again and pass each board down. And so I think the vision for the future is just maintaining those good habits, but also giving us a lot more leeway than we've had in the past. Neither one of us has to park at a pier anymore. So we actually upgraded to electric vehicles. And we actually got the quality brand new electric vehicles rather than trying to go with something used. We have 6 surfboards. I've lost track of how many surfboards we have. We've reached that point where it's a valuable family important thing to us that we have multiple surfboards. And I know exactly where all of them are in the house. I just don't know where the grand total is right now.
Yeah, right.
This is the first time that we've lived in a house that wasn't rented. It actually has our name on the deed. We were renting for 10 years, and we figured out at first that we were tired of the smokers downstairs and the college students up there with their bass music. And that's how we wanted to stay in a single family location. And that's how we shifted our renting experience from renting apartments to being a single family home. And so I can see those aspects carrying forward. And as far as the vision for the future, just having the freedom to choose what we want to do next. When our child is not dictating our schedule, we are very much looking forward to, well, I guess we can talk about Milan. We were watching the Paris 2024 Olympics, and there was a scroll at the bottom of the TV that said, go to this website and register to be on the wait list for Milan 2026 Winter Olympic tickets. And we said, sure, why not? Let's give this a shot. Worst thing we do is we don't buy the tickets. And this past February, 6 months after the Olympics in Paris had finished, we'd totally forgotten about this. You randomly get an email that says, congratulations,
you've been selected to be able to buy tickets. So that was great.
And so we're just like, okay, we need $5,000. We got it. We're good. Let's buy it. Yeah. And so we're going to Milan in February of 2026 to go watch women's hockey. And we've watched Sochi 2014 for women's hockey. We watched Pyeongchang 2018 women's hockey. Like, that's something we've been doing for years. The only reason we got YouTube TV in 2018 was so that we could watch the winter hockey at the Winter Olympics. That is something that we value, like going to Milan, which Italy is one of our favorite countries to visit, and being able to go see, hopefully, USA versus Canada live and in person for the Winter Olympics would be amazing. Hopefully USA wins, but we're not biased.
I'm biased. I'm definitely biased. Growing up in Minnesota, I'm biased.
And we're going to be bringing our what will be our 6-year-old then, and your parents are coming along as well, because that's an experience that we can actually share together as a family.
Yeah, right.
I think we can go on a limb here in Military Money Manual and say we'll be cheering for Team USA in the Winter Olympics. So I think,
yeah, exactly.
I think we can safely say
there you go.
Put that flag in the ground, and it's an American flag, and the ground is Canada.
Exactly.
Let's be honest. Yeah. We all signed up for one military. So.
There will be one hockey jersey I wear to cheer next winter.
I got me one too, but we'll actually be coordinating.
Yeah,
exactly. So I kind of forget to talk about the book a lot because it's one of those things that's so ingrained into my lifestyle, our lifestyle, that I don't really think about it that often. But around that time, there was this big period in late 2018 where I was going through the transition class to figure out whether or not I wanted to stay active duty or not. And it just so happened that my parents on slow travel were visiting around that time. And so after we figured out, oh my God, we have Lean 5, we've made it. One of the next questions was, well, do you want to help us write a book? I said, what do you mean? And my dad is explaining to me about how, as the writer of the Military Guide for Financial Independence and Retirement, how people keep saying, yeah, sure, we got it. You got financial independence. How are you helping your daughter achieve financial independence? And he said, I need some help writing that book. I'm like, oh, I got plenty of ideas. I spent my time in the transition class, especially during the financial part. I should have been paying attention. When they're talking through how to do a proper headshot for your next job, I'm like, no, I'm talking about the outline for chapter 1, 2, 3, and 4 in the book. Like, I already know what quotes I'm going to be putting at the beginning of each chapter and what checklists are going to be at the end of each. I was just in my own world writing the outline during that. And my dad and I finished the book in 2020, somewhere in that haze of tiredness with our baby and the pandemic. We were sending edits on Google Docs back and forth of, well, the editor says to do this and our author advisor says to do that, but this is our tone and we want to do this instead. And we're just There's a photo of me somewhere. You can see the purple bags under my eyes as I'm holding up the book. Like, we made it. I'm still not sleeping through the night because I only have an 8-month-old, but we made it. When people say, oh, you've written the book, I'm like, well, yes, but I'm not making J.K. Rowling money. It was something that was fulfilling to do, and it was something that I'm glad that we wrote, but it's not something that's going to make me rich. And so that's what I like about our lifestyle, is that we don't have to rely on one single thing. We don't have to rely on your job or my fun employment, as I call it. I work for fun and personal finance now. You don't have to rely on the book. We don't have to rely on a side hustle. We could basically stop working today and we would be set for life, to borrow Scott Trench's book title there. But we choose to do what we want to do because we like it. You actually enjoy your job.
I enjoy my job in the Navy. Like, I love doing communications, also leading sailors. It's a lot of fun to me.
And I think one of the things that also made it easier is that when he says things like, hey, something came up, I need to make a phone call. I said, what came up? He's like, this country's shooting at that country. I'm like, oh, yeah, you got to go take care of that. Like, I get that. There's not a lot of explanation about how your job is important and why you have to pull long hours. It's just something I understand because I've not done your job, but I've been on the receiving end of a ship that needed his services as a communications officer to get what they needed done.
So that's the Raising Your Money Savvy Family for Next Generation Financial Independence. Where can people find that, and where can people connect with you if they want to connect with you and talk to you more about your experience and situation?
Absolutely. The book is available pretty much everywhere. Check your local library, check your on-base and off-base libraries first. Feel free to go to Amazon. Of course, you're going to find the Audible edition and the electronic edition, the Kindle edition on Amazon as well. I'm sure a lot of local bookstores probably don't have it, but you can always ask them to order it for you special if you want it. I am in a lot of personal finance groups on Facebook, groups like Choose by U.S. Military, Personal Finance for U.S. Service Members and their families. There's a couple of more niche groups like U.S. military veterans living overseas. I'm in those groups as well. And you'll find me just under my name, Carol Pittner.
It's easier to contact me through her.
Yeah, you work in a
there.
classified building all day. You don't even get to touch your cell phone. So start with me.
Awesome. Well, Carol, Ken, thank you so much for joining us today and talking about dual military life in the military, how to achieve financial independence while serving together in the military, getting on the same page with your communication, your expectations, your financial future, and your why, with some really tactical tips, as well as some good stories about Air Force appreciation. And so go Air Force. Thanks for joining us today.
Chairperson, anyway.
Thank you, guys. See you later.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of the Military Money Manual podcast. If you're enjoying the show, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. This helps others find the show, and we really appreciate it. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
The views and opinions presented here are those of the speakers and do not necessarily represent the views of the DoD or its components. Reference to any commercial products or services does not constitute DoD endorsement of those products or services.